The day I found the box on Vivian Bell's porch, I learned that some favors change your whole life before you even agree to them. I almost didn't open it. That was the part one kept coming back to later. If I had just carried it inside and set it on the counter without looking, none of the rest of it would have happened. But curiosity has never once left me alone, and neither, apparently, does fate. My name is Nate Wallace. I'm 30, I run a small renovation crew out of a town most people drive through without noticing, and up until that spring, my life had a shape I could have described in one sentence. Work hard, keep my head down, help my friends when they needed it, and try not to think too much about the fact that my last relationship had ended with a woman telling me I was, quote, too easy to predict. I didn't argue with her. There wasn't much point arguing with someone who had already packed her bags in her head before she said it out loud. Marcus Bell had been my best friend since we were 19 years old and broke enough to split a single order of fries between 3 people. We'd built decks together, gotten fired from the same landscaping job the same week, and stood up for each other at 2 weddings that didn't work out and one that did. When his parents split up after 26 years of marriage, I was the one who helped him load his mother's boxes into a moving truck on a Saturday that smelled like fresh-cut grass and heartbreak. Vivian Bell had never been just Marcus's mom to me. She'd fed me more dinners than my own mother had during my college years. She was the kind of woman who remembered which of my grandparents had passed and asked about them by name a year later. 51 years old, sharp-eyed, quietly funny in a way most people missed because they were too busy underestimating her. She'd spent almost 3 decades married to a man named Richard who apparently decided somewhere around year 24 that he wanted a life that didn't include her in it. The divorce had been quiet and clean on paper and absolutely brutal underneath it. That Saturday, we were moving her out of the big house on Ashford Lane and into a smaller place near the edge of town, a little brick house with good bones and a porch that needed new railings. Marcus and I had been hauling boxes since 8 in the morning, and by early afternoon my shirt was stuck to my back and Vivian kept apologizing for how much stuff a person accumulates in 26 years of marriage. You don't have to apologize for owning furniture, I told her, setting down a lamp box. I do when I'm the one making 2 grown men carry it, she said, and there was a tiredness under the joke that neither of us mentioned. A delivery truck pulled up around 1 o'clock. The driver left a plain brown package on the porch steps and drove off before any of us reached the door. Marcus grabbed it without thinking, the way you grab any package that shows up mid-move, and carried it inside to set with the rest. Mom, you ordered something. Vivian glanced over from where she was unwrapping dishes. I don't remember ordering anything. That should have been the end of it. Except the box had already torn a little on one corner from the drive, and when Marcus set it on the counter, the flap fell open on its own. I wasn't trying to look. I want that on the record. I was carrying a floor lamp past the kitchen island when I caught the edge of what was inside, and once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. Tissue paper, and underneath it, a gift certificate for a professional photography session, the kind with a glossy insert showing soft lighting and a woman draped in a silk robe against a velvet backdrop. Clipped to the certificate was a folded printout from a matchmaking service, the kind that promises to write your online dating profile for you if you're too rattled to do it yourself. Marcus saw it half a second after I did. The kitchen went completely still. Mom, he said slowly, what is this? Vivian's face went through about 4 different colors in under 2 seconds. She set the plate she was holding down on the counter with more care than the moment required, buying herself a second she clearly needed. It's nothing. It says boudoir photography on the front of it. I can read, Marcus. I set the lamp down by the door, mostly so I'd have somewhere to look that wasn't directly at either of them. My ears were doing something warm and uncomfortable. You're doing online dating, Marcus said, like he was working out a math problem he didn't like the answer to. I signed up for a service my friend Carol recommended, Vivian said, chin lifting the way it does when a person decides they're done being embarrassed. They said the photos would help. Apparently people don't take profiles seriously without professional pictures. I didn't realize the sample photos on the certificate would be quite so dramatic. Dramatic is one word for it, Marcus muttered. I'm 51, not dead, Vivian said, and something in her voice cracked just slightly under the humor. I'm allowed to want someone to have coffee with who isn't your father's lawyer calling about paperwork. Marcus didn't have a response for that. I watched something soften in his face, guilt maybe, or just the specific discomfort of realizing your mother is a person with a whole interior life that doesn't revolve around you. He mumbled something about needing to grab the rest of the boxes from the truck and left the kitchen fast enough that it was almost funny. That left me standing there with Vivian and a torn-open box holding the most embarrassing thing I'd ever accidentally witnessed a friend's mother order. "Well," she said, looking at the box like it had personally betrayed her. "That's mortifying." "I didn't see anything," I lied. "You absolutely saw everything, Nate. Your ears are the color of a stop sign." I laughed before I could stop myself, and something about that broke the tension enough that she laughed too, one hand pressed briefly against her forehead like she was holding her own dignity together by force. "I'm going to cancel it," she said. I don't even know what I was thinking. Carol makes everything sound reasonable when she's had 2 glasses of wine, and I apparently listen to her when I've had 1.5. "You don't have to cancel it because of us," I said. "It's your life." She looked at me then, really looked, the way people do when they're deciding whether you meant something or just said it to be kind. That's a generous thing to say to a woman you just caught mid-crisis. It's not a crisis. It's a Tuesday with bad timing. That got a real laugh out of her, short and surprised, like she hadn't expected to find anything funny about the day. We didn't talk about it again while we finished unloading. Marcus came back in with 2 more boxes and an expression that said he'd decided the fastest way through his own discomfort was to pretend the last 5 minutes hadn't happened, which was fine by me. By 6 that evening, the truck was empty, the new house had furniture in roughly the right rooms, and all 3 of us were sitting on mismatched folding chairs on the front porch eating pizza out of the box because nobody had energy left to cook. "Thank you both," Vivian said, looking out at her new street like she was still deciding whether to trust it. "I mean that." "Anytime," Marcus said around a mouthful of pizza. I nodded and didn't say much, mostly because my brain kept circling back uselessly to the photography certificate sitting torn open on her kitchen counter, and I didn't know what to do with that, so I did what I always did with things I didn't know what to do with. I said nothing and drove home with the radio low. I didn't hear from Vivian for 4 days. That felt right. I figured the whole thing would quietly disappear into the category of things that are funny later and unbearable in the moment, and I'd go back to being the friend's mom's mover guy she thanked once a year at Marcus's birthday dinner. Then my phone buzzed on a Thursday evening while I was elbow deep in a busted garbage disposal at a client's house. "Vivian, I have an embarrassing favor to ask. Feel free to say no." I stared at the screen longer than the message warranted. "Me, now I have to know what it is." "Vivian, the photography place refunded me after Marcus's reaction rattled me into canceling. But the profile writing service already charged me and won't refund that part, and they're insisting I need current, natural photos by Friday or I lose the slot I paid for." "Me, okay. Vivian, I don't know anyone else who owns a decent camera and won't make this weirder than it already is. Would you take some photos of me this weekend? Nothing dramatic. Just normal. A person standing in a garden looking like she has her life together, which would be a nice illusion to capture on film." I read that message 3 times. I should have said no. I want to be honest about that, because half the reason this whole story matters is that I knew, somewhere in the part of my chest that handles bad decisions, that saying yes was not a neutral choice. But I also knew what it looked like to watch someone get handed 26 years of their life back in cardboard boxes, and I knew what it felt like to be told you were too settled to keep, and something about both of those things made the decision easier than it should have been. Me, I can do that. I'm not a professional, fair warning. Vivian, neither is the man I'm trying to impress on a dating app, presumably. We'll be even. I laughed alone in a stranger's kitchen with a garbage disposal in pieces on the counter, and something about that laugh felt different than it had in a long time. Saturday morning, I showed up at Vivian's new house with my camera bag and a level of nervousness that made no sense for what was supposed to be a simple favor. She met me at the door in jeans and a cream-colored blouse, hair loose instead of pinned back the way I usually saw it, and for half a second I forgot what I was there to say. "You look nice," I said, which felt like the safest true thing available. "That's the goal," she said. Convincing photographic evidence that I am, in fact, a functioning adult woman capable of holding eye contact. High bar. You'd be surprised how many men on these apps can't clear it. We worked through her backyard first, her leaning against the porch railing, her standing under the one decent tree, her laughing at something I said that wasn't even that funny but came out easier than expected once the awkwardness burned off. She kept second-guessing herself between shots, tugging at her sleeve, asking if she looked like she was trying too hard. You look like someone having a normal Saturday, I told her, checking the screen on the back of the camera. That's the whole point, right? Normal is what you said you wanted. Normal is harder to fake than dramatic, she said. Dramatic you can just put on like a coat. Normal means people can actually see you. I didn't have a smart answer for that, so I just kept shooting. Somewhere around the fourth stop, we ended up at the little downtown park 2 streets over, the kind with a stone bridge over a shallow creek that every small town seems to have exactly one of. Vivian sat on the edge of the bridge railing with the afternoon light catching gold in her hair, and for a second I forgot I was holding a camera at all. You're staring, she said without looking at me. I'm framing the shot. You've been framing the same shot for 10 seconds. It's a good shot. She smiled at that, the real kind, not the one she'd been giving the camera all afternoon. Careful, Nate. A woman my age isn't supposed to enjoy compliments from men half my age quite this much. I'm not half your age. I'm 30. Details, she said, but she was still smiling. We finished the shoot with coffee at a little shop on Main Street, sitting at a window table while she scrolled through the photos on my camera, narrating her own reactions like a running commentary. Oh, that one makes me look like I'm plotting something. That one's good. Delete that one immediately, I look like I'm sneezing. You're not sneezing. You're laughing. It's an ugly laugh photo. It's a real one. Those are worth more. She looked up at me over the rim of her coffee cup, and something in her face went quiet and careful. You're very good at this, you know. Making a nervous woman feel less ridiculous. I'm not sure you were ever ridiculous. I ordered boudoir photography certificates and got caught by my own son, Nate. There was a solid 20 minutes there where ridiculous was the generous read. I laughed, and she laughed with me, and for a moment the coffee shop noise faded into something soft and easy, the kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. The photos went up on her dating profile that Sunday night. She sent me a screenshot with the caption, "Verdict." And I sat on my couch staring at it longer than a person should stare at a picture of his best friend's mother on an app designed for strangers to judge each other. I told myself the tightness in my chest was just protectiveness. I was mostly telling myself the truth. Over the next 2 weeks, the favor should have ended there. It didn't. Vivian texted me updates like I'd become her unofficial consultant on the whole endeavor, half because I think she genuinely didn't have anyone else to ask and half, I suspect now, because she liked having a reason to talk to me. Vivian, a man named Gerald messaged me. His profile picture is him holding a fish. Is that a red flag? Me, depends on the fish. Vivian, it's a large fish. He looks very proud of it. Me, then it's a yellow flag. Proceed with caution. Vivian, you're supposed to be helping me, not narrating my dating life like a nature documentary. Me, I contain multitudes. She sent me a laughing emoji that made me smile at my phone like an idiot in the middle of a hardware store. 3 days later, she called instead of texting, which was new. I have a first date Thursday, she said, no preamble. With a man named Paul who seems normal on paper and I am, for reasons I cannot fully explain, panicking. You've been on dates before. You were married for 26 years. I was married for 26 years, which means the last first date I went on was during the first Bush administration. I don't remember how this works, Nate. What do I say? What do I wear? Do I still know how to flirt or did that die somewhere around year 15 along with my ability to stay up past 10? You want me to help you practice, I said slowly, understanding the shape of the favor before she even asked it. There was a pause on the line. Would that be strange? It was strange. I knew it was strange even as I was already saying yes, already agreeing to meet her at a coffee shop the following evening to run through what she called a dry run, which turned into us sitting across from each other at a small round table while she asked me questions like a woman conducting an interview for a job she badly wanted and was terrified of failing. Okay, she said, folding her hands on the table like she was about to begin a formal proceeding. Pretend you're Paul. Ask me something. So, Vivian. Tell me about yourself. Too broad. He'll ask something like that and I'll freeze and start talking about my divorce within 4 minutes, which the dating articles tell me is a catastrophic mistake. Then don't talk about your divorce. What do I talk about? My whole personality for the last 3 decades has been wife and mother. I don't know what's left underneath that. I looked at her across the table, the nervous energy she was trying to laugh off not quite hiding the real fear underneath it, and something in me wanted very badly to reach across and tell her that everything left underneath it was the best part, the part nobody had bothered to notice in years. Tell him you garden, I said instead, keeping my voice light. Tell him you make a lamp box sound like a personal grudge. Tell him you once got a group of movers to cry laughing over a burnt casserole story. You've got plenty left, Vivian. You just haven't had anyone ask in a while. She went quiet for a second too long. That's a kind thing to say. It's just true. You're going to make some woman very happy someday, you know, she said, and there was something underneath the lightness of it that neither of us examined too closely. The right one, I mean. Not the one who called you predictable and left. How do you know about that? Marcus talks. And for what it's worth, predictable is the wrong word for you. I'd call it steady. Steady is a compliment most people are too impatient to recognize as one. I didn't have an answer for that, so I looked down at my coffee and let the silence sit there, warm and complicated between us. The dry run turned into an hour, then an hour and a half. By the time we left, Vivian seemed lighter, laughing easier, walking me to my truck with her arms crossed against the evening chill. Thank you, she said. For not making this weirder than it already is. I make everything weirder than it already is. It's kind of my whole thing. She smiled at that, and for one long second, standing there under the parking lot lights, neither of us moved to end the conversation. Then she stepped back first, the way a person does when they've noticed something and decided not to name it. Good night, Nate. Good night, Vivian. I drove home with the radio off, which had become something of a habit whenever I needed to actually think about something instead of drowning it out. The date with Paul happened on Thursday. She texted me an update afterward that read like a business report. Polite. No spark. Talked about his boat for 40 minutes. I nodded along like boats were the great unsolved mystery of my life. I don't think there will be a second date. Me, you survived, though. Vivian, I survived. Thank you for the practice run. I don't think I would have made it through dinner without it. Me, anytime. I meant it, and that should have worried me more than it did. Over the following month, there were more dates, spaced out, mostly disappointing. A man who spent the evening talking about his ex-wife. A man who cancelled twice and then stopped responding entirely. A man who seemed nice enough but who Vivian described afterward as pleasant in the way a waiting room is pleasant. Each time, she called me afterward, and each time, I found myself looking forward to the call more than I wanted to admit, sitting on my porch step with my phone against my ear listening to her narrate the small disasters of modern dating with a dry humor that made the whole thing feel less like helping a friend's mother and more like something I genuinely didn't want to end. Marcus, for his part, had gone strangely quiet on the subject. I ran into him for beers one Friday and he brought it up himself, turning his glass slowly on the bar top before he spoke. Mom seems happier lately, he said. Whatever this dating thing is doing for her, it's working. She's laughing more. That's good, I said carefully. She mentioned you helped her with some photos. And practice dates, apparently. He looked at me, not accusing exactly, more curious in a way that made my stomach tighten. That's a lot of favors for one guy to be doing. She didn't have anyone else to ask. She has me. You panicked over a photography certificate, Marcus. I don't think she felt like asking you for dating advice after that. He laughed, some of the tension draining out of his shoulders. Fair. I did panic a little. A lot. A little bit a lot, he admitted, and the conversation moved on to other things, and I told myself the uneasy feeling in my chest was nothing, just the ordinary discomfort of being caught doing something you haven't fully admitted to yourself yet. It was 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, that everything finally cracked open. Vivian had invited me over for dinner as a thank you, she said, for all the favors, nothing more than that. I told myself the same thing walking up her porch steps with a bottle of wine I debated buying for 20 minutes in a grocery store aisle like it was a decision that mattered more than it should have. She answered the door in a soft green sweater, hair down, kitchen behind her smelling like garlic and rosemary, and something in my chest did a slow, unwelcome flip that I chose to ignore. You didn't have to bring anything, she said, taking the wine. You didn't have to cook. I wanted to. It's nice having someone to cook for who isn't going to complain the seasoning is too adventurous. She glanced back at me over her shoulder as she walked toward the kitchen. Richard used to say that. Every single meal. 26 years of the same complaint about paprika. I like paprika. I know, she said. I remembered. That small sentence landed somewhere it shouldn't have, the same way Diane remembering the mustard had landed for someone else in a story neither of us knew we were echoing. I followed her into the kitchen and busied myself opening the wine so I'd have something to do with my hands that wasn't reaching for a feeling I didn't have a name for yet. We ate at the small table by her kitchen window, not the dining room, which she said still felt too much like the old house even in a new one. Conversation moved easy and unforced, work, her garden, a funny story about one of my crew members getting stuck halfway up a ladder for reasons neither of us fully understood. Then, somewhere between the second glass of wine and the last of the pasta, she got quiet. Can I ask you something honest? She said. Always. Why do you keep showing up for this? The photos, the practice dates, the phone calls after every disappointing dinner with a stranger. You could have said no to any of it, and you didn't. I keep waiting for you to get tired of being my dating coach and you just don't. I set my fork down slowly, buying myself a second I clearly needed. I don't know if coach is the right word for what I've been doing. Then what is? The kitchen went very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming, a car passing outside, my own pulse doing something loud and unhelpful in my ears. Honestly, I said, I think I keep showing up because some part of me likes being the one you call. And I know exactly how that sounds, and I know exactly whose mother you are, and I've spent a month telling myself it doesn't mean what it feels like it means. Vivian didn't say anything right away. Her hand, resting on the table near her wine glass, went very still. Nate. You don't have to say anything, I said quickly. I shouldn't have. I'm not upset, she said, cutting me off gently. I'm trying to figure out if I heard you correctly, because I've been having the same thought for weeks and telling myself it was inappropriate to even let it form into words. I looked at her. Really looked, the way you look at someone once you've stopped pretending you aren't. What thought? That the men on those apps kept feeling like placeholders, she said slowly, like each word cost her something. And that I looked forward to your calls more than I looked forward to any actual date I went on. And that when you called the last one pleasant in the way a waiting room is pleasant, the thing I felt wasn't disappointment about him. It was relief that I got to call you afterward instead of him. The room felt smaller than it had a minute ago. Vivian, you're Marcus's mother. I'm aware, she said, and there was a tired honesty in it that cracked something open in my chest. I've spent 3 weeks being aware of that every single hour I let myself think about you. It doesn't seem to be helping. This isn't smart. No, she agreed. It really isn't. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then she reached across the small table, not quite touching me, her hand hovering somewhere near mine like she was asking permission from the air itself. I covered her hand with mine before I could talk myself out of it. If we do this, I said, we do it honestly. No sneaking around. No pretending it's something smaller than it is. I don't want small with you, she said quietly. I've had small. Small was 26 years of paprika complaints and a man who left the second the version of me he wanted got old enough to need real conversation instead of easy silence. I didn't kiss her that night. I want to be honest about that too, because it would have been easy, and because some part of both of us knew that whatever came next needed to survive daylight before it survived anything else. I left her house with my heart going faster than it had any right to, and a promise between us that we'd tell Marcus together, honestly, before either of us let this become something we had to hide. We didn't get the chance to choose the timing. Marcus showed up at his mother's house unannounced 2 days later, the way sons do, carrying a bag of groceries he said she'd mentioned needing. He found my truck in the driveway and me in the kitchen helping Vivian cook, standing close enough at the counter that there was nothing subtle about the space between us or the lack of it. What is this? Marcus said, not a question so much as a demand for the ground to make sense again. Vivian set down the knife she was holding, careful and deliberate. Marcus. You're cooking dinner together. In an apron. Nate, why are you wearing my mother's apron? It was closest, I said, which was true and also the least important fact in the room. Marcus's eyes moved between us, and I watched the exact moment understanding landed, The way his face went from confused to something harder, something betrayed. You've got to be kidding me. Marcus, let's sit down and talk about this properly, Vivian said, her voice steady even as her hands weren't. Talk about what, exactly? My best friend and my mother. Yes, I said, before Vivian could soften it into something smaller than it was. That's exactly what we need to talk about. This is insane, Marcus said, running a hand through his hair, pacing a tight circle in the kitchen like the room itself had gotten too small. You helped her with dating photos. You helped her practice for dates with other men. And this whole time you were, what, working up to this? No, I said. It wasn't like that. I didn't plan any of this. It just happened, slowly, and I didn't recognize it until it was already there. That makes it worse, not better. Marcus turned to his mother. Do you hear yourself? You're my mother. He's my best friend. This isn't a small thing you can just decide to do because you're lonely and he was nearby. Vivian's expression didn't crumble the way I half expected it to. Instead, something in her straightened, steady and sure in a way I recognized from every conversation we'd had over the past month. I am not lonely, Marcus. I was lonely for the last several years of my marriage, in a house with a man who stopped seeing me a long time before he stopped living with me. This is not that. You don't get to compare Nate to Dad. I'm not comparing them, she said. I'm telling you the difference. Your father made me feel invisible for a decade before he ever left. Nate has spent a month making me feel like a person worth noticing again. Those are not the same thing, and you calling this insane doesn't make it any less true. Marcus looked at me, something raw and hurt underneath the anger. You couldn't have said something. Before it got this far. You couldn't have just told me you were falling for my mother instead of letting me find out standing in her kitchen. You're right, I said. I should have. I was scared of exactly this reaction, and I let that fear make the decision for me instead of just being honest with you like I should have been from the start. I'm sorry for that part. I'm not sorry for the rest of it. The rest of it being what? Dating my mother. Being the person she calls after a bad date instead of the one who caused it, I said. Being someone who noticed her instead of walking past her for 26 years. I didn't go looking for this, Marcus. But I'm not going to pretend it isn't real just because it's inconvenient for you. The kitchen went silent except for something simmering on the stove, forgotten in the middle of everything. Marcus stood there for a long moment, jaw working, clearly wanting an argument that wasn't quite forming into words. I need to leave, he said finally. I can't do this right now. Marcus, Vivian said, and there was real pain in it, the specific ache of a mother watching her son struggle with something she couldn't fix for him this time. I'm not saying never, Mom. I'm saying not right now. He looked at me one more time, something complicated passing over his face, then turned and walked out. The front door closed harder than it needed to, and the house went very quiet. Vivian stood at the counter with both hands pressed flat against it, steadying herself. That could have gone worse. It could have gone a lot better, too. He didn't say never, she said, though her voice shook slightly on the word. That matters. I crossed the kitchen and stood beside her, not touching her yet, just close enough that she'd know I wasn't going anywhere. Are you having second thoughts? She was quiet for a moment, staring at the stove like the answer might be written in the steam rising off whatever we'd forgotten to turn down. No, she said finally. I'm having exactly the thoughts I've had for weeks. I just wish they hadn't cost my son his composure to get here. He'll come around. You don't know that. No, I admitted. But I know he loves you enough to try, eventually. And I know I'm not going anywhere in the meantime, whether that makes this easier or harder for him. She looked up at me then, eyes bright but steady. You're very sure of yourself for a man standing in my kitchen wearing my apron. I contain multitudes, I said again, and she laughed, short and surprised, the tension in her shoulders finally breaking just slightly. For 3 weeks after that, Marcus didn't call either of us. I gave him the space, the way you do with someone you respect enough to let them be angry on their own timeline instead of rushing them toward forgiveness for your own comfort. Vivian texted him twice, careful, warm messages that mostly went unanswered, and I watched her handle the silence with more grace than I think I would have managed in her position. Then, on a Thursday evening in early spring, my phone buzzed with a text I hadn't expected. Marcus, can we get beers? Just us. We met at the same bar as always, and for the first 10 minutes neither of us said anything about the actual reason we were there, talking instead about work and a game neither of us had watched closely enough to discuss with any authority. Finally, Marcus set his glass down and looked at me directly. "I've been thinking about it a lot," he said. "The anger part, I mean. And I think most of it wasn't really about you and my mom being together. I think it was about realizing my mom is a whole person who existed before she was my mom, and that person has needs I never really thought about because I never had to. That's a lot of self-reflection for a guy who usually just gets louder when he's upset." "Shut up, I'm trying to apologize." He almost smiled. I watched her be sad for years and I told myself that was just what divorce looked like, something she'd get over on her own timeline. I didn't think about what it would actually look like for her to be happy again, and then when it showed up, it happened to look like my best friend, and that broke my brain for a minute. A minute being 3 weeks. A long minute, he admitted. I still think it's weird. I want to be honest about that. I don't think it's ever going to stop being a little weird for me. That's fair, I said. It's weird for us too, some days. But, he continued, she called me last week and told me about some guy at the grocery store who tried to hit on her, and she said she wasn't even tempted to give him her number because she already had someone who made her laugh every single day, and I realized I hadn't heard my mom sound like that since before I could really remember. Not even really during the marriage. Maybe never. I didn't say anything, giving him the space to get to wherever he was going. "So I'm not going to pretend I'm thrilled about this," Marcus said. "But I'm not going to keep punishing both of you for something that's clearly working, either. I just need you to actually be serious about this. Not some weird phase because you were both lonely at the same time." "I'm serious about it," I said. "I've never been more serious about anything." Marcus studied me for a long moment, then nodded, slow and reluctant but real. "Okay. Then I guess I'm going to have to get used to my best friend showing up at Thanksgiving as my stepdad, which is a sentence I never in 100 years thought I'd say out loud. We haven't gotten anywhere near that conversation yet." "You will," Marcus said, with the particular confidence of a man who'd clearly already resigned himself to an outcome he hadn't chosen but had decided to accept. "I've seen the way she looks at you. Trust me. You will." He was right, as it turned out, though it took another year before I asked her, standing in that same backyard where I'd first taken photographs of a nervous woman trying to convince a dating app she had her life together. I didn't need a camera for that moment. I just needed the truth, which by then had gotten a lot easier to say out loud than it had been that first Tuesday evening in her kitchen. "This whole thing started with an embarrassing box on your porch," I told her, the ring already out, her hands already pressed to her mouth in that way people do when they've seen something coming and still aren't ready for it. "It did," she said, laughing through tears the way she always did when something mattered too much to keep composed about. "So I figure it's only fair I ask you something equally direct." I got down on one knee in the grass, and she made a sound that was half laugh, half something closer to a sob. "Vivian Bell, will you marry the man your embarrassing package accidentally introduced you to properly?" She said yes before I even finished the sentence, which she still likes to remind me broke some unspoken rule of proposal etiquette, and I still like to remind her that a woman who once ordered boudoir photography certificates to impress strangers on the internet doesn't really have the standing to complain about etiquette. Marcus walked her down the aisle 6 months later, and when people asked him afterward how he felt about his best friend marrying his mother, he'd shrug and say it started with an Amazon package and somehow turned into the best decision either of them ever made, even if it took him 3 weeks and one very awkward bar conversation to admit it. Vivian tells people now that it all began because a delivery box tore open on the wrong corner at the wrong moment. I tell people it began the first time she laughed at herself instead of at me, standing in a kitchen full of half-unpacked boxes, unwilling to let one embarrassing afternoon convince her she wasn't allowed to want something more than she already had. Both versions are true. Neither one is the whole story. The whole story is that sometimes the favor someone asks you for isn't really about photographs or practice dates or dating profiles at all. Sometimes it's just an excuse for two people to keep finding reasons to be in the same room until neither of them needs an excuse anymore. What would you have done if you accidentally saw something embarrassing your best friend's mom ordered, and then she turned around and asked you for a favor because of it? Would you have said yes as fast as I did, or would you have run the other direction? And has anyone ever asked you for a small favor that ended up changing your whole life without either of you seeing it coming? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.